Okay, Jeff read Psalm 33:12. How blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord, the people whom He's chosen to be His special possession. And of course, originally that was written to the Israelites because they were God's people, and no one else was at the time. They were special. They were picked out from the whole world to be His people. We don't know why He picked them out. It was just His choice. God don't always explain everything. We were looking at Sunday school this morning, looking at Daniel, and there's things that are not explained, and they won't be until we need to know them. But we need to keep in mind when we're praying, we need to pray for America, pray for our country. We need to be teaching our kids where we need to be going, and try to put some blunt to the secular teachings that are going on out there, and I could just go on about that forever. But there might be a chance that our country has sunk. If it is, we still have Christ, we're still His sons and daughters, and that don't depend on any kind of national identity. But all that aside, our country's still great, and Jeff was just talking about it a while ago about going to Franklin and seeing this parade and people that still come out. Or was it Rodney? Okay. Sorry, Rodney. Anyway, there's still hope for America. I guess that's what I'm saying. And what I want to do here this morning is go through the Declaration of Independence and just talk about that a little bit. And that'll consume a little time, but we've got it. And I looked at the Constitution. I think the Constitution would be a little harder because it has a lot of rules that are so forth. But looking at an overview of it at some point in time might be good. But the Declaration of Independence, which was declared on July the 4th, 1776, is what we're celebrating today. You know, we're celebrating the United States, but we're celebrating this declaration. The Declaration was a group of men representative of the people got together and said, this is what we declare. This is what, we're going to pull away from Great Britain and form our own nation. And this is why. They're not just going to say, up yours, King, King George. They're going to say, this is why we're doing it. And we're going to set forth our grievances. And that's what they did. And it always astounds me when I read writings and letters and history from that time as to how educated these guys were. In a time when there were no kindergartens and there were no first steps and there was no, they did have schools, they did have colleges, but they were kind of skimpy compared to now. The difference was they really taught you things. At the end of a rod, if you didn't do it. So I think, it's just my private opinion, but I think mankind's kind of de-evolved, to put it in a certain way, at least in our educational system. So to start, and I'm going to stop at some points and do a little commentary here, but in Congress, July the 4th, 1776, the unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America. Now, at the time, there were 13 states, 13 sovereign states under the British Crown. When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them. A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to this separation. So here is the first mention of God. Right in the first part of the Declaration of Independence, God is mentioned. And I've heard, from secular sources that America is a totally secular nation, that we're not supposed to, God is supposed to be separated from everything secular out there, and that's just not the case. The separation of religion from the rest of government is simply to protect the worship of God, to protect religion. That was their intent, not to protect the government from religion. So nature's God is our God. He's the one who gave us nature, who created the world. And he gave us the rights to dissolve the bonds that hold us to the British crown. And to go on, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Self-evident. You know, they thought it self-evident that all men were created equal. And that was not the case at the time. In general, you know, governments didn't consider everybody equal. They considered the king to be a pretty good notch above the rest of us. And if you were some kind of minister below the king, you were still higher than the common man. But that was one of the revolutionary things about the United States and its formation, was we were all to be considered equal, endowed by their Creator with certain rights. Our rights, when you read about your rights, our rights didn't come from the Constitution. You know, you think they didn't come from the Bill of Rights, which we'll look at some point in time. But the Bill of Rights basically, and this document sets forth, just reiterates that these rights were given to us by God. That's where our rights come from. Endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. So the United States ideally derives its whole power, of the power of the government, from the consent of the governed. Now that's not everybody's consent, but it's supposed to be the majority. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it's the right of the people to alter it or to abolish it. So I've been conversing with some of my some people that are on the other side, and a big deal to them was the so-called insurrection of January the 6th up in Washington. That, my friends, was not an insurrection. That was a protest that kind of got out of hand. But the United States citizens have a right to be insurrectionists. We see here that our forefathers were. And to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence indeed will dictate what governments long established. So all men are created equal, and God has given us certain rights, and among them are the right to life. We have a right to live. And that right is being abridged right now. Thousands of babies are dying every year. Hundreds of thousands, over the world are dying. So the right to life is not a right that survived so far anyway. It's being violated. And we need to keep this in mind as a church, that we need to stay close to the right to life movement. We have a right to liberty. Each American is to be free and do whatever he can under the law. We're to do as we please, but only in a lawful way. And there's some countries out there that require a passport to go to the next county. You got to pass through a police checkpoint to go to the next town. I've been in countries like that, and it's kind of interesting. But in the United States, there's free travel. If we want to get on a plane, go to California today, we still can. That's not true everywhere around the world. Now, under these COVID emergencies, we had some freedoms that were abridged. It kind of gave us a preview of what it could be like if all this continued. We have to keep our voices raised against such as that. Vote these perpetrators out. We have a right to the pursuit of happiness. Now, we're not guaranteed happiness. You know, you can't say as an American you're guaranteed to be happy. You're not, you know. You just have the right to pursue it. You have the right to pursue happiness. Now, this is not reiterating all the rights that we have. This is just showing some of the major ones are. And should not be changed for light or transient causes, and accordingly all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they're accustomed. So what they're saying here is that we tend to kind of suffer along with things and not to really abolish them until they get really, really bad. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations pursuing invariably the same object evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government. That's still in effect, by the way. Declaration of Independence has not been canceled. And to provide new. The right and duty to throw off a repressive government is still in force. Guards for their future security, such has been the patient suffrage of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, I have trouble with that word, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. He has refused his assent to laws, talking about the king here, the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. He has forbidden his governors to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance, unless suspended in their operation till his assent should be obtained. And when so suspended, he has utterly neglected to attend them. At this time, you have to remember the king was maybe not an absolute monarch, but he was close to it. He was very close to it because he had Parliament, all this, to do these things, but until his stamp of approval went on it didn't have any lawful effect. He's refused to pass other laws for the accommodations of large districts of people unless those people would relinquish the right to representation in the legislature, a right inestimable to them and formidable to tyrants only. He has called together legislative bodies at places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from the depository of their public records for the sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with his measures. He's dissolved representative houses repeatedly for opposing with manly firmness his invasion on the rights of the people. He's refused for a long time after such dissolutions to cause others to be elected, whereby the legislative powers, incapable of annihilation, have returned to the people at large for their exercise, the state remaining in the meantime exposed to all the dangers of invasion from without and convulsions within. He's endeavored to prevent the population of these states for the purpose obstructing the laws of the naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage their migrations hither, and raising the conditions of new appropriations of lands. I thought this was interesting. You know, we're worried about too much migration then, and at the time they wanted migrants. They wanted people to come in and settle the country, to push the Indians back and establish farmlands, establish towns. He's obstructed the administration of justice by refusing his access to laws for establishing judiciary powers. He's made judges dependent on his will alone for the tenure of their offices and the amount and payment of their salaries. He's elected a multitude of new officers and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. He has kept among us in times of peace standing armies without the consent of our legislatures. At the time, the British king could order an army sent to the colonies, and guess what? He might pick your house for a couple of them to live in. You had to support them and feed them and take care of them, iron their uniforms even. This went on, it really did. And one of the things in our Constitution, in the Bill of Rights specifically, prohibits this from doing this, the government from doing this today. He's affected to render the military independent of and superior to the civil power. And that's another one. Today, the civil power rules the military through the president and the secretary of defense, and below that the various secretaries of the armies, and then the chief of staff and the heads of the various services report to him. So it's all done civilian power. He's combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution and unacknowledged by our laws, giving his assent to their acts of pretended legislation, for quartering large bodies of armed troops among us, for protecting them by a mock trial from punishment for any murders which they should commit on the inhabitants of these states. So not only did they stay with you, but if they kill somebody out of an argument or something, they'd have a mock trial and basically declare them innocent. For cutting off our trade with all parts of the world, for imposing taxes on us without our consent, for depriving us in many cases of the benefits of trial by jury, for transporting us beyond seas to be tried for pretended offenses. You know, now we have the right to trial by jury. They don't always happen, but the conditions for it are there. At the time, you know, you could be tried by a court appointed by the king, who would just be a judge. For abolishing the free system of English laws in a neighboring province, establishing therein an arbitrary government and enlarging its boundaries so to render it at once an example and fit instrument for introducing the same absolute rule into these colonies. What they're saying there is they have established a firm rule in Canada, and they're using Canada to push that rule down on the colonies. And Canada, of course, still is part of the British Empire. For taking away our charters, abolishing our most valuable laws, and altering fundamentally the forms of our governments. For suspending our own legislatures and declaring themselves invested with power to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever. He has abdicated government here by declaring us out of his protection and waging war against us. He has plundered our seas, ravaged our coasts, burned our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people. You know, at this time, the Revolutionary War was already going on when this happened. You know, this didn't necessarily start it. It was already going on. At this time, he is transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the works of death, desolation, and tyranny already begun with the circumstances of cruelty and perfidy scarcely paralleled in the most barbarous ages and totally unworthy the head of a civilized nation. So not only did he send British troops over here, but he hired people from Europe to come over here as mercenaries. And the Hessians are one example you see in the history books. There was large groups of Hessians who were German troops that were here just for the money. We toured a gold mine down in Charlotte a few years ago called the Reed Gold Mine, if you get a chance to go there. But this gold mine was discovered on a farm of a Hessian soldier who, after the war, decided he wanted to stay in the United States. So he actually got a land grant from the government of the United States to go establish a farm near Charlotte, North Carolina. And of course, the story is that his slave, Peter, found this large rock in a creek while he was fishing, and it turned out to be a 5-pound gold nugget, and that started the whole thing. But anyway, the United States actually kept some of these people after the war. He's constrained our fellow citizens taken captive on the high seas to bear arms against our country, to become the executors of their friends and brethren, or to fall themselves by their hands. So they had a thing called press gangs, that if a British warship came across an American merchant ship, they could pull up alongside of it and go on board and take off 10 people or 25 or whatever they wanted and put them in the British Army. They had the right to do that. He's excited domestic insurrections among us and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers the merciless Indian savages whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. Doesn't sound like innocent Native Americans to me, does it? So you see how this kind of shows you how things were seen at the time. You know, sure, we did push the Indians back from their lands. And the colonists did do a lot of criminal things, I think, if you look back at that. But at the same time, these Indians were merciless. They would burn you at the stake if they caught you. In every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. A prince whose character is thus marked by every act to which may define a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of a free people. Nor have we been wanting in attentions to our British brethren. We've warned them from time to time of attempts by their legislature to extend an unwarrantable jurisdiction over us. We have reminded them of the circumstances of our immigration and settlement here. We have appealed to their native justice and magnanimity, and we've conjured them by the ties of our common kindred to disavow these usurpations, which would inevitably interrupt our connections and correspondence. They too have been deaf to the voice of justice and contiguity. So not only they're saying here is the king at fault, but so are the legislatures of Britain, and they've acted in the same way. We must therefore acquiesce in necessity, which denounces our separation, and hold them, as we hold the rest of mankind, enemies in war and in peace friends. We therefore, the representatives of the United States of America and General Congress assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, appealing to God once again. Do, in the name and by authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states, that they're absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as free and independent states, they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and do all other acts and things which independent states might have right do. And for the support of this declaration, with firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. And a lot of these guys, they not only pledged it, but they did it. A lot of them lost their families, they lost their homes, they lost their lands. A lot of them died penniless because of what they did here. So Ben Franklin said, gentlemen, we'll either hang together or we'll hang separately. And it was true. You've heard of Alexis de Tocqueville. I'm not sure about the pronunciation of his last name because he was French, and I've always had trouble with French words. But he said in 1840, he was a French philosopher, I sought for the key to America's greatness and genius in her harbors, in her fertile fields and boundless forests, in her rich mines and vast world commerce, in her public school system and institutions of learning. I sought for it in her matchless constitution. Not until I went into the churches of America and heard her pulpits flame with righteousness did I understand the secret of her genius and power. America is great because America is good. And if America ever ceases to be good, America will cease to be great. We're on the cusp of that, folks. Amen. We are. Christian influence is being lost. If we continue to slide towards secularism and paganism, I don't know what will happen, but it won't be good. We need to continue to be fishers of men, continue to pray for our country. Are we going to become like Europe? In Great Britain, the country we've been talking about here, there's a recent headline on Fox News that Christianity is dead in Great Britain. They have all these churches that were built before. People still go there a little bit, but Christianity is largely dead in Great Britain. It's a shame. Will it become like here? And so the future of America depends largely on the response of the church to what's going on, to the call of Christ. You know, we've gotten lazy, I think. It's different in some of these third world countries. You know, the heat of the gospel is still hot there. So we need to pray for America. We need to be salt and light in our culture. And, you know, I'm not advocating any sort of revolt here or violence. I'm just saying that people need to stand up. We really do. We need to stand up. And it's so good to hear about people who do stand up for the flag and for our country. And because we're a country that's free and have all these freedoms, that's why people who are not friendly to the United States can do all these things. That's why they can freely do it. So only freedom-loving people and Christians can save our country. And it comes right down to it. If America fails, we'll have lost a great blessing. The world will have lost a great blessing. But the good news is that followers of Christ, we have a longer viewpoint than just America. You know, if America goes, we're still Christians. Christianity is not dependent on America, but America is in large part dependent on Christianity. That's just a fact. So we need to pray. We need to teach our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, and all those generations the real history and the real faith in America, because our public schools are trying their best to go in the other direction. Our public schools in a lot of places right now are teaching our kids that America was just basically designed to keep slavery going, to get power for the white majority. And it's a sad thing, but it's true. And I just thought we'd hit on that this morning, since it is the 4th, it's Independence Day, to remind us all that we have a responsibility for Americans. We have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, but we also have a responsibility for those things and for the rights that are reiterated in the Bill of Rights. Let's pray. Thank you, Father, for our country. Thank you for America. Help us continue to be a great blessing to the world, to be a leader in the world, and to be an exceptional country that still looks to you for our answers. Help, Lord, help change the mind of these secularists and these government officials who don't believe in you, and help them turn, Lord, and turn towards you. We bless you and praise you. We ask your continued blessing on this church. In Jesus' name, amen.